us a prayer with him. Father, we pray that you use your vessel to bless your people this morning. Heal the brokenhearted. Bind every wound. Nourish us. Lift us up from every married clay. And open our eyes that we will see you in your glory. Spend your spirit so greatly on Rev Grahm this morning. Fill him with your spirit, with your power, with the water of your word, to bathe us and cleanse us and bless us in Jesus' name.
I think you would agree with me, wouldn't you, that the last few weeks have been pretty tough. I can't think of a time when the news has been so consistently bad. Whether it was the terrorist attack on Westminster Bridge, the bomb in Manchester, the attack in London Bridge, or in this last few weeks, the fire at Grenville Tower. It's been upsetting, but it's also been a time when, for me as a Christian, I've had to explore within myself and my relationship with God the question, how do we respond to such situations? And it's a question which no doubt you have asked yourself, and also maybe your neighbours have asked you. How do we respond? We can respond in a number of ways. When another picture comes up, we can be generous, of course. When people are in need, then our generosity matters, whether it's in practical terms, as we see here with people bringing clothes to a rest centre at Grenville Tower, or whether it's through the gift of money to various funds which are set up to bring relief to people. There is that response which comes from within our hearts that we want to do something, and therefore we can act generously. And we can join other people too. For generosity, of course, is not just the privilege of Christians. We can respond in a second way. And we can, as we've heard in our reading from Romans 12, respond with empathy and sympathy. We can mourn with those who are mourning. We can pray with those who are in need of our prayers. And again, here's a picture of one of those shrine-type places which spring up now at a place of disaster, where people come together to lay flowers and to light candles. And I've been involved in a number of such situations over the years, usually in schools, where the school has experienced the death of a young person. And to have a place where we can light candles, where we can remember, and where those who can pray, are very powerful places. And we should pray for those who are in these dire situations, not just at these shrines, but in our own churches and within our own prayer lives. So we can be generous, we can pray, we can empathize, although we can never fully get into the mind of those who are suffering in such a terrible way. But there's a third way that we can respond. And we can protest. We can march through the streets with our banners. We can complain against those who have contributed to this terrible thing that has happened. We can be there out in public saying that we want change, or that we stand firm with those who are suffering. We can physically and visibly stand up for what is good and to stand up against what is evil. But the question that has bothered me is, are these three types of response good enough? Do these three types of response cut the mustard? Do these three types of response really do what God wants us to do? to be the people that God wants us to be. And as I've been thinking about that, I've been drawn particularly to Romans chapter 12, to what I've called a Christian Manifesto. Not because I want to be political in any way, but because here laid out in Romans 12 are points of action. Points of action that God calls us to take in response to the circumstances of the world. Our starting point we find at the opening of chapter 12. And remember there that Paul writes, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, not conforming to the pattern of this world, but transformed by the renewing of your mind." Our starting point has to be remembering who we are. Remembering that we are called as God's people to be living sacrifices, to give of ourselves in service to others as Jesus gave of himself to us. His great loving act on the cross has transformed our lives both today and for all eternity. And we are called also to be living sacrifices, to give our lives for what is good to other people. Not to conform necessarily to the world, although we will go along with some of the actions of the world by being generous and by going to these makeshift shrines, but actually transforming our minds, seeing things in a different way, seeing those who bring harm into our society in a different way, being renewed by the Holy Spirit in our desire to do what is right, in our desire to help those who suffer, in our desire to be God's people at a time of stress and strain. And so if we look at Romans chapter 12, and particularly from verse 9 onwards, we see this manifesto. We see these practical tips, if you like, that Paul gives the church in Rome and therefore to us to live out. And I believe that if we look at these 4 tips, we may be starting to get somewhere to answering that question, what should our response be? And there they are, the 4 of them laid out before you. We need to love actively. We need to keep our spiritual fervour. We need to look beyond ourselves. And we need to deal lovingly with those who are against us. It's nice for them to trip off the tongue like that. They're much harder to put into action. But if we are serious about our discipleship, we should at least try to put them into action. So let's start with the first one, to think about what it means to be loving actively. Verse 9 says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love and honour one another above yourselves. Love must be sincere. It's very easy to make proclamations of love and sympathy because that's what's expected. It's very easy to appear to be loving and caring, but actually as soon as the words are out of our mouths, we just carry on living as we've been living before. Paul says our love must be sincere. In other words, it needs to be not just words, but it needs to be action. It needs to be followed through. And that means hating what is evil and clinging to what is good, because only what is good expresses God's love. God's love cannot in any way, shape or form be expressed through anything which has any tinge of evil about it. Be devoted to one another in love. Honour one another above yourselves. Now, it could be argued that Paul here, in writing in Romans chapter 12, was writing to the church in Rome. And he was quite specifically writing to that group of early Christians. But these words also, I think, apply to us. Not just within our church community, but within the communities that we live in. Our neighbourhoods, our cities, our towns, our villages, our families. Be devoted to one another in love, not just by word, but by deed, in sincere love. So how do we understand what that love is? Well, we go to 1 Corinthians 13, because there, of course, is our model. Again, Paul writing, and he says, love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, is not boastful, is not conceited, does not act improperly, is not selfish, is not provoked, and does not keep a record of wrongs. How different that is to perhaps the way of the world. For there are many in the world who would want to keep a record of wrongs, who would want to pile up the accusations against those people and those authorities for whom they would want to blame some of the terrible things which have been happening. But remember that we are called to transform our lives. We are called to think differently to the rest of the world. The rest of the world would want to be boastful. It would want to be conceited. It would want to say, well, if they'd have followed my advice in the first place, this would never have happened. That's boasting. That is, in a way, creating a sense of envy that is beyond us as Christians. We are called to be patient and kind, not to look for those which we want to blame, not to get our pound of flesh, not to get the retribution, but to reach out to those who are in need. And in 1 Corinthians 13, Paul goes on to say, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Always. That's a very powerful word, isn't it? Because in our lives, in our world, we always say, well, there's always a justification not to do the other thing. There's always circumstances which we need to take into account. Yes, we agree that we should always protect and always trust and always hope. But, and that little word but gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we start to make excuses for why we shouldn't trust. We start to give reasons for why we don't have hope in the future. We start to find ways of saying, well, I'm only going to persevere loving this person or this group of people insofar as they love me, or they're nice to me, or they conform to the way I want them to live. Paul uses this word always. And that is where we are different from the world, because the world will always say, sometimes. God loves us always, not sometimes. Jesus' power is in our lives through the Holy Spirit always, not just sometimes. And so when we respond to the needs of the world, we should do this always in this way. Protecting those who are vulnerable. Trusting in the goodness of people. Always having hope that the power of God will prevail. That which is evil will be ultimately overcome. So our first task then, when we are faced with these difficulties, is to love actively and properly. Not just to mouth the word love, not just to give people the impression that we are people of love, but to actually do it and to really allow God's power in our lives to enable us to do it, even when it is challenging. But Jesus loved the unlovely. He reached out to the leper. He reached out to the prostitute. He reached out to the Samaritan woman at the well. We are called to act in the same way. The second thing which we're called to do is to keep our spiritual fervour. In other words, to keep calm and keep the faith. To keep calm and keep the faith. Verse 11 says this, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervour, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. You can see a little bit of an overlap there with those words from 1 Corinthians. A couple of months ago, our church was hit by tragedy. It was a tragedy which we knew was going to happen. One of our church members died at the age of 45. She had actually been ill for something like 20 years. She'd had a kidney transplant, kidney donated to her by her father, which had failed. She had had to give up her job as a nursing tutor because of failing eyesight. Her internal organs really just couldn't cope with life. She became intolerant to practically every food group that you could name. And consequently, she suffered from ulcerated legs, failing eyesight, and was generally very, very poorly. And towards the end, in her closing month of life, she had 4 heart attacks, and which she recovered from. But the point about this lady, whose name was Jane, was that she never lacked her zeal. She never gave up on her faith in Jesus Christ. She was always praying for others. She was always seeking ways to serve God in the church, even though that service was somewhat limited. And others flocked around her to be inspired by her, to as if something would fall from her onto their lives, because she was such a woman of faith that people looked to her for their inspiration. She continued to be one of our house group leaders. She lived in Berkhamsted. The part of her story, by the way, is that she was, while she was ill, she was involved 3 years ago in a motorbike accident, which then broke bones in her body, but more importantly, also broke bones in her husband's body. And he is still in hospital in London 3 years after the road accident. And so she was terminally ill in Stevenage Hospital, in Lister Hospital, and her husband was having operations in the Royal London Hospital at Whitechapel at the same time. It was a miracle that 2 days before she died, her husband was able to be moved from London to Stevenage for the day, to spend the day with her, and 2 days later she died. And Rick still is in Whitechapel Hospital. But the point is that she continued to serve God as much as she could, particularly as a house group leader. She would come to St Albans for dialysis, to be on a kidney machine for an afternoon. And at the end of that afternoon, someone from her house group would go and collect her from the hospital, take her home for an evening meal. She would then leave the house group, and then one of the house group would take her back home to Berkhamsted, where she was living with her father because she could no longer live by herself, and with her husband in hospital too, she needed to be cared for. Never lacking in zeal, even though things were bleak for her. She would continue to pray, if it is your will that I will be healed. That would be her prayer day after day. When anybody visited her, she would want to know about their lives. She wanted to pray for them. She wanted to give them advice about how they could continue their walk with God. That's what keeping our spiritual fervour is. And for us as Christians, when we face the tragedies, not just of an individual life like Jane's, but the tragedies of the world that we've seen in these past weeks, we too need to keep that fervour. We need to be joyful in hope, knowing that the evil one does not have the final say. Knowing that God's goodness and graciousness and mercy is in action even in times of peril and suffering. We need to be patient. We need to be patient in affliction, not angry with God, but thankful that he is there to carry us through. And we need to be faithful in prayer. And if we do these things, then we go some way towards dealing with the atrocities and the situations we're in, because our eyes are on God, not on the tragedy. Our eyes are on the way in which God is working, rather than on those things which have been destroyed. The third item then that we need to think about is looking beyond ourselves. Here's a quote from Mother Teresa of Calcutta. "I see God in every human being. When I wash the leper's wounds, I feel I am nursing the Lord himself." Is it not a beautiful experience? I love that quote. I feel I am nursing the Lord himself. She doesn't think about herself, or she didn't think about herself and the risks that she was running. Rather, she saw in the leper, in the poor people of Calcutta, the image of God. She was not concerned about the inconvenience that it put her or her people through. Her concern was for someone else and for God being seen in that person. Here again what Paul says in Romans chapter 12. "Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Bless those who curse you. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position." See, there's no think about yourself in those words. There's no protect yourself before you think about other people. There's nothing in there about making me the centre of the universe. It's about sharing in other people's needs. Blessing those who curse you. How easy it is to feel when something goes against us, or we feel oppressed, to feel sorry for ourselves. No, Paul says, think about the person who's doing the cursing. Bless them. Yes, pray to yourself, pray for strength, certainly. But primarily, look beyond yourself. Bless those who curse you. And share in their lives. Share in the lives of other people. Mourn with those who mourn. Rejoice with those who are rejoicing. Share in their experience of life. Because that experience of life is something which God is giving them, and you and I can help them understand that if we share in it. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Isn't it true that we're more interested in the things which separate us than the things which divide us? We are more interested in understanding what our differences are rather than coming together as God's people, as God's creation. Yes, people come from different backgrounds and different faiths, but all of creation was made in the image of God. All creation needs to be able to hear the good news of Christ's message of salvation. If we keep looking inwards and go, woe is me, isn't life terrible, then we will never change the world, because we will not understand or address the situations which people find themselves in. Remember these words of Jesus, those words which we call the Beatitudes. Jesus says, blessed are the meek, those who do not exercise pride or boastfulness, who are humble in their relationships with other people. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the pure in heart, those who seek goodness rather than evil. And blessed are the merciful, those who bring God's mercy practically into the world. This practical living and loving is actually something which we will be blessed by God for and through as we practice it. And Paul goes on to say, repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Now, it's very realistic, isn't it? If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all people. We can easily say, well, these things which are happening in the world are beyond my control. It's up to the politicians to do this and that. It's up to the United Nations to do this and that. It's up to local councillors to do this and that. That's true. But we all have a responsibility to live at peace with one another in the church, in our communities, with different races, different faiths. We have the power to exercise peace and faithfulness to others. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, as much as we are able to do, even if that's only befriending our neighbour, we should do it. Some years ago we had a racial attack on one of my neighbours. Strange, you might think, in St Albans, but it did happen. And I witnessed that attack and got involved in some of the aftermath of it. And I went to see my neighbour, who is a Muslim taxi driver, and apologised on behalf of the community. He said to me, have you thought where those stones which were thrown at my taxi came from? They came from your front garden. What? And it was true. We have pebbles in our front garden, and some young people came along, scooped the pebbles up and used them as missiles against this man's taxi. What could I do? I could go and apologise, I could go and offer the hand of reconciliation and friendship, but I also had to change our garden. For I was inadvertently, unwittingly providing some of the weapons that were being used by those who would do this man harm. Since that time, come Eid, which is this weekend, he or one of his family will bring us a gift of food. Since that time, every Christmas, I take them a Christmas cake that I have made. It's a little thing, but the fact that we changed our garden, the fact that we exchange gifts at significant times of the year for each of us, means that we live out these words. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. And then finally, there is just one last verse I want us to look at. Verse 19. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. Now you might say, it's all very well living together, it's all very well being nice with each other, but surely somebody has to be brought to justice. I will not dispute that. But that job is God's job. That is why he is the God of judgment. It's not our task to get retribution, to get revenge. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. We have to leave everything in God's hands. Do what we can, how we can, when we can. But let's leave God and his ultimate power to be the one who gets revenge, if indeed revenge is what is needed. For surely our God is a God of love and forgiveness and power. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we just lay before you our lives in the face of all the things which have been affecting our world in the past few weeks. We have already prayed for those who are victims of terror and fire and disaster. But we recognise that we have a role to play as your people. We pray that you would sustain us and help us, that you would give us the gifts we need to be able to love the unlovely, to care for those who need care. That by your Holy Spirit you would maintain our spiritual fervour, that our relationship with you would not be destroyed or damaged in any way because of what is happening in the world. Help us to look beyond ourselves, to see you in all people and in all things, and help us to deal lovingly with those with whom we have differences. And as we do so, we allow you, our Lord and our God, to lead us and our nation as you will. Amen.